as Target, we're having a problem with our distribution channel, just like everyone else in the country. We can't get product on the shelves fast enough. Can you, as a supplier, supply your local Targets with your product? You'll get onboarded with us and just go out and put your stuff on shelves. I'm like, of course I can, right? Like, why would I say no?
Myles Powell wasn't just an entrepreneur who started out of college when he set his eyes to build 8 Miles. He was actually a well-established civil engineer with a master's degree working full-time as a project manager. In fact, after graduating University of Delaware, he went to Penn State to get his MBA. But after he started working as an engineer, he knew he had to make a change.
Getting my first full-time job, which for me was, creme de la creme. I'm going to get paid now. I'm going to be a real adult. Like, this is all stuff that I had worked so hard for. And my second day of this first engineering job, I remember sitting at my desk and I had this moment and I said, man, I've got to do this for 40 years. And I'm like, I can't. It doesn't feel right. I can't do it.
Myles knew he could make a bigger impact in creating his own company than working as a civil engineer.
Hey, how you doing? Good. I'm good, Frank. Thanks for having me on, man. It's a pleasure.
There are 3 things to keep in mind. 1, 10,000 units used in shipping. 2, mental health for any entrepreneur. And 3, persistence in guerrilla marketing when starting out as an entrepreneur. Today, Myles is working on scaling his company. This is how Myles Powell built 8 Miles. For Cofounder AI, I'm Frank Frisby. This is Growing Startups. Myles started out with aspirations to become an architect, but ended up becoming a civil engineer.
You mentioned kind of a little bit about why you become a civil engineer, but why did you actually do it?
Education, school is very important. And so my parents were from early on said, hey, it seems like you like math and science. You should become an architect or an engineer, right? And so I kind of ran with that. They said, hey, it's going to provide you a good living down the road. You should do that. And I said, well, that sounds good to me. I love Legos. Let me pursue engineering, right? So I did that at the University of Delaware. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was not prepared for that type of curriculum.
But his heart was into cooking. After finishing his degree, Myles went on to do a cooking contest on a Food Network. After his time with the Food Network, he focused his time with his company, 8 Miles, perfecting his assorted sauces and started working on his mac and cheese.
And because food was something that I enjoyed so much and I loved to cook, that was like my natural progression. I said, I want to do something with this. And I already had in my brain that I wanted to start a business. I just thought it was in engineering. But when I thought about food, I said, you know what? That's what I want to do. I want to run a food business. So that was kind of the very beginnings of this entire journey.
For several years, Myles worked on his business while keeping his day job as a project engineer. Now he's working on 8 Miles full time. This wasn't the first time he had quit his job. He quit his job in the early days because he believed things would work. But he quickly realized he was too early.
Like, I remember, so I started this in 2015. And I mean, it's not that long ago, but back then, information wasn't as readily available for consumer packaged goods companies as it is now. And I remember when I was starting out, there was virtually I didn't have a bunch of industry experts I could rely on. Like, it was me and Google. I had a couple of business mentors that weren't familiar with this space, but just run businesses in general. So it was me, them, and then me just trying to figure it out. So every decision I made, I was like, I don't know if this is right. I'm just gonna go with it. And so, I mean, I still make mistakes today because it's funny. I had this conversation with someone else. Every decision I make, it's different than like working in corporate. Because in corporate, you can present both decisions to your boss and say, which one do you think is better? In this environment, you're presenting to yourself and you decide.
It wasn't easy in the early days. Myles had to spend a lot of time out of his comfort zone to get people to see his product. From in-store demos to parties to meet and greets where he had to have people just try his product. He even mentioned he had to find ways to reduce the resistance so people would taste his mac and cheese.
So in the earlier days, we did a lot of in-store demos, and I used to hate doing those because you're on your feet. It requires you to be really not aggressive, but so I think I'm personable, but in a reactive way, not in a proactive way. Whereas at demo, you have to always be reaching out to people, and you can't be afraid of them being like, no, thank you. And it's a funny science experiment when you look at how people act in that scenario as a passerby. And I used to play around with this, where I would say, if I'm looking down, or if I'm looking non-attentive, they'll come up to the table. If I'm looking at them as they walk by, they'll feel a certain way and keep walking. But I used to really dislike doing those, because they're a time suck too. You're talking about 4 hours of your day standing there trying to get people to try stuff. Pre-COVID, that was one of my things I used to hate doing. These days, now that we're kind of in a different position, for me, honestly, and this is something I don't hate, but I'm trying to get better at doing, it's prioritization of tasks. Because when you're running your own company, it's very easy to be attracted to things that look exciting and you want to do, as opposed to doing things that you have to do in the moment.
Once the product started getting traction, he was able to put the mac and cheese into local stores. It was then that someone from Target was doing product discovery and reached out to him.
Target was a wild one. So, and this is something I'm going to remember probably forever. It was December of 2019. And I got an email. So at this point, we were in Whole Foods. We had actually just launched Whole Foods earlier, like that month. I think we may have been in a total of I'd say 100 locations total. Got an email or a LinkedIn message from a Target buyer. First off, I'm like, this can't be real. I'm like, Target, right? So he emails me. He goes, hey, just found your product. They do what's called trend shopping once a year, where they go to a different city and they just look for different innovative food items. They say, we found your product in one of the DC local grocery stores. We would love to talk to you about it. I'm like, oh my God, it's crazy. So we had a couple of conversations with them. And they basically invited me to pitch the product. If I was accepted, that product would be on shelves. That would have been the following May. And, obviously early 2020, COVID hits. So they come back and say, hey, we're pausing all potential new companies as we evaluate everything going on. A couple months later, they come back and say, hey, as Target, we're having a problem with our distribution channel, just like everyone else in the country. We can't get product on the shelves fast enough. Can you, as a supplier, supply your local Targets with your product? You'll get onboarded with us and just go out and put your stuff on shelves. I'm like, of course I can, right? Like, why would I say no?
Not only did he get into Target, he also got into Sprouts. His goal is to spread his mac and cheese throughout the entire country. He even created a map to show how he wanted to start with one region and expand. But he didn't stop there. He also landed a big deal with the University of Delaware. Once you have reached product market fit, it changes how the business operates. You shift from pushing people to buy to now being pulled. That's exactly what Myles is dealing with. He is now scaling, but scaling can be very tricky.
And that's all a part of scaling up too. So in the very beginning, we were using a pot, right? Like a big pot, right? We took that and we end up using a tilt skillet, which is essentially a huge pot, right? It could be 20 gallons that it can hold at a time. But now we're getting into the point where we can no longer do it manually. So we actually recently bought an automatic filling machine. So where you're taking the product and putting it into a funnel at the top, and it's portioning out your product like in line, right? A lot easier than hand scooping. And that's just the beginning. It's kind of fascinating when you look at the technology that you can use later on, from the portioning piece to the packaging piece, like you mentioned. Like, there's machines out there that we're going to look at getting, which will automatically create the box for you. So it's a flat box, like a corrugated box. Yeah. This machine will just fold it up for you instead of you doing it by hand. And it doesn't seem like that much, right? Because you're like, oh, you're just folding a box. But you got to remember that extra 4 to 5 seconds per box, and you're doing 10,000 boxes. That adds up, and it helps you save time and money.
How do you manage to know when to scale, and how? Because that's a question that a lot of founders have a hard time doing. How do you know when to scale up, when to just keep things throttled until you know when to go to the next level?
It is very hard. I've done it based on certain what do you call it? Certain like milestones or benchmarks. So for me, it's like, hey, I know in 3 months we're gonna bring on these 2 new chains, and these I can estimate that these new chains will have this amount of volume. If I invest in this equipment, yeah, from a cash flow standpoint, I'm gonna take a hit up front, but when I produce that stuff, my margins are gonna be better and it's gonna feel a lot better, and I can get it out quicker. So, and typically, at least in CPG, it might be a couple of months from time of accepting a new store to having to fulfill your first PO. And unfortunately nowadays with the supply chain, right, some of this stuff takes months at a time to get to your warehouse. So you gotta kind of have confidence that saying, hey, we've got this momentum. I'm gonna bring this machine in, and then I'm gonna go sell to fill that gap between this is semi-efficient to being maximum efficient. So it's a lot of it's gut, a lot of it's projections. There's no like guarantee.
Although entrepreneurship may look cool these days, many founders struggle because most people don't understand them. They're often alone in their journey, and it can be difficult at times. Myles notes that this can be one of the hardest parts of entrepreneurship.
So there's 2 reasons why businesses fold. Number 1 is they run out of cash, which is, just a terrible situation, and just there's a lot of factors behind that, but you got no cash, you can't proceed. The second reason is mentally they can't do it, because you have to be willing to like withstand all of these trials and tribulations. And the weird part is, it's like they're your fault. It's not your boss that's giving you all this work and putting you on it. It's you doing it to yourself, which makes it even harder to like stand there and do it. That's why they say we're crazy, because we do these things like we can't shake it because it's on us, but we believe in something. So that's why I always say it's definitely the mental aspect that is the most challenging thing to get over.
No founder can do everything, and Myles knew this. But in the early days, he did a lot of it himself. So he has been slowly building his team to help expand the brand of 8 Miles and Mac and Cheese.
For the longest time, I was running all of my social media accounts. I mean, I thought I was decent at it. I'm not an expert, but I could hold my own to a degree. But that requires dedication and time, which I didn't always have. So I ended up hiring and hired 2 people, and it's been great, right? It's kind of like I don't touch it. They run with it. I check on it, and I'm like, man, I should have done this earlier, right? And so like my whole attitude is like, I'll learn it on my own, and once I learn it, I'll hire someone to do it. So that way I know how to do it, but I don't have to spend time doing it. And I think as a solo entrepreneur, we get caught in like, I want to do it all. Like I'm certainly that way. Like I want to be involved in everything and touch everything. I don't have the money to hire a team. So like we hired interns, right? There's certain things that I've contracted out as not a permanent hire, because you can't do everything. And that's, for me, that was the hardest lesson. Like I can't be everywhere at the same time. I got to learn how to pawn some stuff off. For me, because I didn't have a big marketing budget where I could just blast social media and all this stuff and just put myself out there, it was persistence in terms of, I call it like by any means necessary. Like talking about the product as much as possible, things like putting it on sale, not for like just to get attention to the retail shelf. People love those sales tags. The demos that I mentioned, like it was pretty much like whatever I got to do to get people to notice this product within a crowded category. It's talking to the store managers about, hey, can we get a better shelf space? Or hey, can I get another facing of my product? Like it's like guerrilla warfare, because you're competing with giants. Like you're a small brand competing with people that spend $1 million a year in marketing, and you can spend 1,000. So you have to be everywhere at the same. You have to be in every nook and cranny. You got to talk to your consumer. It's not easy, but you gotta put yourself out there.
Work hard, get dough. I can't get no sleep, please make my life more simple. Miles inside these shoes so I don't stomp, I tiptoe.